Be safe on Liberty, Commander. Oh, don't worry about me. You boys and girls try not to get too bored and let me know if someone beats my record for cloak and shot put. Sure thing, sir. Commander Jeremiah Jerry Escobar Bridger strides away from the Dauntless and resists the temptation to whistle as he walks. He'd waited weeks for this. He'd been carefully planning it since before they left Earth. The hardest goodbye for him had been losing his faithful dog, Togo, a wise, elderly, unique breed of dog that had finally passed away of old age shortly after he was selected to join humanity's mission to the stars. He'd had the vet get a draw of Togo's blood, and then had that DNA sequenced. He couldn't subject a dog to the cruelty of zero-G, but perhaps there would be a solution out there in the galaxy, a way for mankind to bring their beloved companions with them. He'd had to fly across the entire span of the world, even to a remote lab in Siberia, then to some of the specialist preservation projects, raiding their data for human companions and some choice livestock. Getting the hardened drive that he'd stored numerous species and breeds worth of animals' genetic code on made had been a massive expenditure in and of itself, but it was all worth it. He'd taken his first leave with his troopers, gotten the lay of the land and let the nerds and eggheads do the legwork. When the ability to transition human file structures to alien-compatible storage mediums became available, he'd cut a deal with a nerd squad kid to get his secure drive copied over. Nothing on the network. Nothing that could be taken from them like the hack. Not even the nerd knew what he'd helped with. He just moved some data around. Then had come the numerous science and recon reports. He browsed them all every morning with his coffee. As a company commander for one of the elite infantry companies of the Dauntless, the real professional head kickers, he had plenty of clearance, so it was just a matter of not going off half-cocked. He doubted he'd get guff over this, but not only would this be good for humans, if he did it right, it'd also be his retirement plan once his fresh term of service to the Undaunted now was finished. He hopped a bus and generally tried to keep to himself. He'd put on actual cologne and some serious deodorant to keep his pheromones somewhat under control. He didn't want too much attention from the various gorgeous alien women walking around. Not that he was against the idea, but he was a man on a mission, and bringing back dogs, cats, and other human companions meant more to him than getting an alien girlfriend. He had quite a ways to travel, across most of the city to a far spire. It wasn't the closest cloning business on the planet, but it was a boutique specialist in rapid cloning as opposed to the more industrial cloning that seemed to be closer to where the Dauntless was birthed. When he arrives, the place is slick, clean, medical almost. Lots of smooth lines, white and chrome. What art and decor there is all inspired by DNA, and not everything in the galaxy has a double helix. Even a dumb grunt can understand that from the images around. Jerry looks around, appreciating the decor as the proprietress comes onto the shop floor. His eyebrows raise. A Volpir! The insanely busty foxwoman slinks over to him, delicately placing a jeweled plug in her nose. My apologies about the nose piece, dear, but I try to be polite with men. My kind, we have a reputation, you see. Yes, I've heard that Volpir can be a touch sensitive to pheromones. Thank you kindly for your manners, madam. Cylindria. But you can call me Syl. All the handsome human men I know do. All right, Syl. How many is that, by the way? Just you so far. So you are, human? Jerry nods slowly. That's right. I'm an officer on the Dauntless, just a soldier. Nothing too exciting. Jeremiah Escobar Bridger. You can call me Jerry if you like. Syl nods slowly, clearly not entirely sure what would bring him here. Well, I appreciate your custom, of course, but what can I do for you? You can clone just about anything, right? Yes, I offer comprehensive cloning services. I mostly do high-end meat for discerning vegan clients that won't eat meat from living beings. But occasionally, we do something a bit more special relating to fertility. All to a higher-end clientele, as I said. My customers include some of the most senior ambassadors and ministers around, along with major CEOs and the like. Yes, the reviews I could find were all absolutely glowing. Jerry smiles at the vulpine alien, and she feels her heart skip a beat or two. He had a crooked half-smile that seemed to promise all manner of trouble for her, but the fun kind of trouble that younger women like to fantasize about, and it seemed pretty damn appealing to Syl at the moment. I have a business proposition for you. Not the type of propositioning I was hoping for, but do go on. The charming alien man laughs for a moment. Do you have an office? This conversation will involve some sensitive data that I won't want to share with all of Centris. Syl quickly leads him into the back, her tail brushing around his ankles. Her Kobe nurse is attending to one of the cloning vats, a custom-ordered set of eggs for a customer who had gone barren but didn't believe in healing comas. Her eyes widen and her jaw drops at the sight of the man. Handle the front naughty. I'm with a client. Or is potential partner the correct term? Client for now. For sure, I'm going to have a commission provided. You can clone living beings. We wouldn't be much of a cloning facility if we couldn't, but please, step into my office and make yourself comfortable. Her office was a warm, welcoming place. Sensible if she also did fertility counseling in here, Jeremiah thought to himself. That could be a very sensitive subject on a good day. In a galaxy where women were even more obsessed with the concept, to the point of having whole religions dedicated to having children, Jeremiah couldn't begin to imagine what coming up barren would be like if healing comas weren't an option. As they take their respective seats, he pulls out a portable holo display that he'd bought on his previous Liberty excursion. He'd made sure a tech had disabled its remote access systems, then loaded in one of the data cards with the massive genetic repository he'd developed. Part of his archiving had been creating a system of icons to indicate what's what at a glance. GYs weren't anything special, but his DNA archive was likely the only one with such a feature. The screen flashes into being and begins to slowly scroll, displaying row after row of Terran wildlife. What are all these? Her jaw drops slightly as the machine automatically scrolls through the mass of animals. There had to be hundreds of different species or breeds being shown to her. Animals from Earth, mostly pets and companion animals. We couldn't bring any with us out of cruel space. The extended period of zero gravity would have been horrible for them. So I thought I'd do the next best thing. Cats, some feline predators that more or less domesticated themselves, and dogs, a domesticated form of a pack-hunting canine called a wolf, are the two big ones. And a lot of people are really missing their presence in our lives in the wider galaxy, me included. The screen flashes through a variety of images of various types of cat and dog. Some of the larger animals aren't much use on Centris, but things like cows are raised for meat. With your cloning tanks, we could potentially go into business producing earth meats like beef, the meat of cows. He displays an image of the animal in question. Oh, like an aurochs. Right, quite similar. That and other animal meat could be produced in small batches, which would let us set the price however we please, really. Personally, I think we keep it fair, especially since it'll be made to order, just like the pets. I even have some very specific DNA samples and data to produce very special meats like Wagyu. What is Wagyu? Sil cocks her head slightly. A very expensive kind of beef back home. It's not just how it's born, it's how it's raised, specifically how the fat marbles on the meat over time. But I have DNA samples and detailed composition notes. We should potentially be able to replicate its structure. Yes, theoretically that's all quite doable. They wouldn't be able to handle it at a larger production rate, but here I should be able to make it work. What about the others, the companion animals? Or these ones here, the big ones? Are they for meat too? Well, for the companions, obviously we'd be producing live animals, made to order to customer specification. No need to keep a breeding stock, though I have enough genetic variation in the various strains that a viable breeding population could be created. Those big ones, though, those are called horses, and they'd be something we'd need to work out how to produce. Why is that? Just looking at them compared to the cows, size isn't an issue. We have some larger tanks downstairs. It's transit, that's the real issue. Horses are grazing and herd animals and aren't really suited to city living. My thought with them was that humans could put them to work on our new colony worlds. Or if their services for work aren't needed, we could retain a form of recreation that a lot of our species enjoys. There also might be a call for their meat, but with things like beef on tap, I suspect that will be a very limited request, maybe from galactic customers. Terran delicacies are becoming all the rage, and many carnivores and omnivores delight in trying rare new things. Well, in that case, horse meat has a reputation for almost being sweet, so that might in fact be quite popular. Cylindria clasps her hands and leans in a bit, showing off some of her cleavage and letting her get a bit closer to Jeremiah over her desk. All right, I'm on board, but let's skip down to the bottom line, shall we? I'm a businesswoman first and foremost after all, and I noticed that us earlier. No one does something for nothing. What do you want for this boon of genetic material? I want a full partnership, half stake or equity in the company, assuming you have no outside investors and haven't given any equity to your nurse. No, I'm the sole owner, but it seems that's going to be changing. You say you're just a soldier. Well, to be fair, I'm an officer as well. But yes, I was a special kind of soldier, called a Marine, before the call for the Dauntless's crew came out. I lead men then, and I lead men now. I see, well, I think you'll be an objective boon to my business, even without opening me up to what appears to be a very lucrative market. By the way, you said you had a special commission for me first? Jerry's eyes moisten a moment. Ah, yes. Just before I left Earth, my dog passed away, Togo. He was a majestic old beast, and he lived quite a long time. I don't want a clone of Togo, but rather I'd like to create his daughter. An image flashes up, letting Cylindria take a good look at it before resuming its scrolling. A gorgeous creature, its S-coat is almost as nice as mine. What type is that one? The breed is called an American Alsatian. They're bred to resemble wolves, but have the kind of personality and temperament you'd expect from a house pet. Gentle giants. Give me the data for the daughter of Togo, my dear. This one is on the house. Something catches Cylindria's eye on the display. Oh, what's that one? She waggles a finger at a somewhat familiar orange, black and white coat passing by on the display. Oh, that one? Jerry taps it, and it expands to show a variety of coat variations, all modeled on a cartoon version of a very familiar-looking four-legged animal. Vulpes familiaris, the domesticated red fox, came out of a Russian program that started around a century ago. I don't know what a Russian is, but that looks quite a bit like a vulpir. Now that I think about it, some of these animals, the dogs, are even similar to Lopin. Never mind the Phaley look-alikes. And these are all beloved companions of humanity? Pretty much. Goddess, no wonder you humans apparently have such strong xenophilic tendencies. You've been bonding with what look like our precursors for thousands of years. There's a lot of art of vulpine women, actually. Some of it from way back in humanity's past, and more recent stuff. In fiction, and in some nations' mythology, vulpine women are known to be some of the most beautiful in all the world and heavens. Cylindria preens herself a bit. And how do I stack up to your myths, Mr. Bridger? Better than any fantasy I've ever had about a fox woman, to be certain. That he might have never had a fantasy about a fox woman before was besides the point, and nothing Cylindria cared about, really. The way he had said it lit parts of her body on fire. Pheromones or no damn pheromones. Cylindria took a deep, steadying breath, resisting pouncing over her desk to surprise marry him right there. She could take a lot, but such aggressive flirting from a man even. It was a bit feminine of him, but from Jeremiah she found it very appealing. Cylindria rose quietly and excused herself from her office for a moment. Naughty! The Cobe nurse sprints over. Yes, ma'am. You're not married, correct? The Cobe nods sadly. Unlikely to be for some time, too. My clan's not had much luck in marriage negotiations, and that tends to be how we end up wed. Most men don't seek out Cobes, it seems. Well, these humans are supposed to be different. Jeremiah has made a significant business proposition. Essentially, he'd be a full partner in a new business that's as much a pet store as a cloning service. The Cobe smiles brightly. Oh, that would be fun. I always liked animals as a girl. He said humans love their pets, and we'd likely get very steady business from human crews, especially as they continue to expand and bring more of their people out of cruel space. The only downside is we might need to relocate at some point, but that's an issue for later. I've decided I'm taking his deal. Very good, ma'am. I've also decided I don't want him as a business partner the normal way. I'm going to close the store, put on some lingerie, and I'm getting a husband. The vulpir pulls the decorative blocker from her nostrils and tosses the piece of embellished gold over her shoulder. It's probably part of his plan. It's all in that damned smile of his, I know it. But I don't care. He's handsome, smart, and has an admirable passion for pets and people alike. Once I'm done, I'll convince him to add you to the marriage. The three of us are in this together. Naughty practically vibrates herself into the air with the brightest, toothiest grin the lizard woman can possibly manage. I'll handle everything out here, ma'am, or should I call you sister now? Wait till I've sealed the deal. Go get him a beverage and ask him to wait for me for a few moments. I need to freshen up. Cylindria strode upstairs to her apartment, already mentally selecting the underwear that would best highlight her charm. She needed some serious battle panties for this job. After all, his deal promised to make her a fairly wealthy woman in its own right. It'd be even better if all of their income was going into the same account. Plus, there was always that damn smile. Her tail swishes. She might need to get some of her sisters in on this. Just, you wait, Jeremiah. I'm going to make you another offer you wouldn't dream of refusing. Then we're going to make enough money that I can buy us a nice planet to retire on and raise all the kits I'm going to have you rut into me. The vulpir smiles to herself in the mirror. Yes, everything was going along swimmingly. Gods, what a world. Jerry thinks to himself as he wakes up, enveloped in soft fur and curves. To his back somewhere, he can feel the smaller, scaled sensation of Naughty snuggling in and absorbing heat from his body like a lizard with a particularly favored sunning stone. She wasn't quite as big as her sister wife, but the tiny Cobe had plenty of love to give, and she gave it gladly. That Naughty could keep up at all with Syl was impressive, size or no size. The vivacious vulpir woman had lived a life of discipline and rebellion to her biology. She hated the reputation of her species for barging into marriages in particular. For one, she was very much a take-charge kind of girl, had been since she was knee-high. But for two, if she wasn't wooing her man properly, preferably as first wife, but just using her biology as a convenient excuse to force her way in it seemed weak to her. Pathetic, even. Now she told him that all her struggles had been worth it, all the patience, and the way she smiled, he was reasonably certain she meant it. The Volpir was many things, but subtle was not one of them. Syl had been at her least subtle when she went about wooing him. It was downright aggressive, actually, but that was more an amusing memory than anything else. Jerry chuckled to himself as he remembered the shocked expression on his face, reflected in a nearby computer screen. He'd figured Syl was into him, pheromones or no, and he had found himself planning to ask her to dinner if she wasn't entirely sold on altering their client-provider relationship. He hadn't accounted for the fact that he wasn't in cruel space anymore. Or Kansas, for that matter. In this strange land over the rainbow, women courted men, and what a courtship it was. Syl had heard that humans like to go for things in a very forthright and upfront manner, so she'd gone straight for what she'd wanted, and Jerry hadn't had any mind to refuse her. She was gorgeous, charming, and again, the discipline to not only order a custom item like her nose plug, and the confidence to dress that item up to make a statement had been very intriguing. Didn't hurt that Syl had excellent taste in lingerie, and Jerry was very weak to such things. She'd walked into her office in a tiny silk nightgown that barely covered below her waist, then cast it aside dramatically, revealing a lot of very tiny pieces of string and lace that had Jerry drooling in a second. The rest, as they say, is history. The muscular infantryman finally wakes up completely and slowly wiggles his way south, slipping out of the girl's arms and out of the bed. The light sheet was for modesty as much as anything, and they were going to cool the room regardless of the season. Syl's soft, downy coat ensured there was no such thing as chilly in her arms. A sigh of happiness escapes him as he gazes longingly at the bed that just barely managed to comfortably sleep three. Warm. Snugly. All he had to do was go back to sleep. It had been 3 weeks since he first entered this world of wonderment. They'd gone to work immediately, so he'd been able to beg off taking honeymoon leave immediately. Considering his new business was now considered a potentially critical part of the Undaunted's morale and colonization plans, he had swung splitting his time between the shop and the ship, and had purchased a small air car with some help from Caddy Downshift. Actually, having human livestock would do a lot for long-term colonization in terms of human morale and comfort. Having human pets available for people was incomprehensibly important long-term. Going home from duty was like a sigh of relief. Jerry finding himself enjoying the drive once he'd managed to get the car's stereo system to play nice with human music. Actually arriving home was pure joy, even if work was still on the menu. They'd worked flat out for 3 days to teach Jerry the process and equipment and produce the first samples of A5 Wagyu. He's still not sure how Sir Philip had known it was ready, but the proper old gentleman had promptly arrived, borrowed their kitchen, and declared the Wagyu to be just shy of perfect, with the only things missing being flavor inflections you could only really get by feeding an animal properly. He'd then bought a large meal's worth of the prototype meat. A surprise, he'd said, for the Admiral and Ambassador. Jerry glances around Syl's modest apartment, mentally taking stock of things before retrieving his sidearm from under his pillow. He'd gotten lost in thought, and the heavy creation of finely machined steel would bring him back down to Centris. The FK Bearno field pistol was a unique choice from what he'd seen. He hadn't made his favorite handgun like so many others had. He'd bought this one and brought it straight from Mother Earth, with plenty of its powerful 7.5 FK ammunition. Rank had its privileges, and while the 2 levels of commander rank was getting handed out like crazy these days, he'd actually been won on his departure from Earth. A quick rack of the field pistol's unique action ejects the rifle-grade hollow point as he goes through a series of dry fire exercises. Trigger control, drawing from a hip holster, drawing from concealment, drawing from axiom concealment, and immediate remediation drills with the help of a spare magazine and some snap caps he'd made. He carried other weapons out in public, of course. The MP7 submachine gun was an old friend from the Marine Raider battalions, and just like the field pistol's 7.5 FK, its round was designed to rip through armor, manufactured or natural, and it wasn't too bad suppressed either. Throw in an MDRX rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor, and no matter how bad the bitch was, no matter how far away, and Jerry could engage and stop the threat. And that was before Axiom. Jerry grins to himself in the mirror. If the crazies wanted a piece of him or his girls, he was going to make sure he entertained them properly. The Galaxy had a lot of naturally armored targets. His preference for a handgun that could reliably punch through ceramic body armor at 100 seemed more and more like a prophetic vision than Jerry just being a bit strange every damn day. Weapons training done, Jerry turns to his daily workout. He only had bodyweight options without going back to the Dauntless for now, but that was fine. He'd rigged a pull-up bar among other things to maintain his conditioning. It confused the girls a bit. He'd shown he could infuse himself with axiom enough that he could probably have a fair shot on an APUC in an arm wrestling contest. So why work his own muscles? They enjoyed the show, however, so they were hardly going to try to stop him. A quick, cold shower to finish shaking the rust off and prevent inadvertent morning glory, they actually had things to do today, and lounging after a workout was a great way to tease Syl into riding him ragged. Armored bodysuit on, pick out some of the slick civilian attire that Syl had picked out for him. Jerry was tucked away his weapons into axiom pockets in his jacket with another far more friendly smile. Man, I don't know what's gotten into me recently, but I think I like it. I can hazard a guess. Marriage suits you, clearly. Syl slinks into the room in a light dressing gown and drapes herself over his shoulders, nuzzling into his neck and kissing him tenderly a few times. Not that I want to sound biased or anything, but you do seem quite happy as a married man. And you know, Naughty, myself and our future sisters are going to make sure you stay happy as a married man. Come what may, we'll stand against it all together. Jerry turns and greets Syl properly, with a deep, breath-stealing kiss. You sound like you're concerned something come up? Syl frowns. Not so much per se, but that attack on those 2 Carib women under undaunted protection has me worried. Then there was the attack on those 3 humans doing laundry, then that nightclub attack on that kid Herbert, right? And finally, all that crazy shit at the Charity Admiral cistern attended with Ambassador Tal. Seems like trouble follows you humans everywhere you go. Jerry slips out of Syl's arms and shifts around behind her, wrapping her up in his arms from behind now, as her tail automatically winds around his leg. Regretting hooking up with me? Not on your life, hotshot. Syl giggles. Trouble's just part of life, besides. I'm enough of an adept to know what you're hiding under your pillow. If that massive pistol of yours can't handle it, I don't want to meet it. I certainly don't want to meet it without you. Syl sighs. There is one thing. I'm a bit jealous of Naughty. She seemed to get pregnant the first night. The fox-like alien pouts for a moment. I was hoping to be first to present you a child. It's not a race, and you'll always be my first wife. The position's certainly an odd one coming from cruel space, but the title, the crown if you want to name yourself queen of our household, is yours. Syl melts into her lover's arms, snuggling happily. Goddess, I knew I got lucky with you. A man seducing a woman. Just being pursued is so special. Continuing to fall in love with you is going to be wonderful, my dear. I suppose having to do the dating after the fact makes a lot more sense in a society with an average of 1 male to 100 women. It doesn't always go like that. Meet cutes, marriage interviews or negotiations, dating services, and a million other ways. Lots of options that let people find love, then get married. But with you, I was feeling a bit impulsive, even without being able to smell you. I imagine I'd have crawled over my desk before you could show me all those lovely animals if I could. Honestly, human pheromones hit like a plasma cannon. Syl leans back to plant another kiss on Jerry's chin. Say it's about time. Shall we go have a look at our other prototype? Jerry resists racing downstairs like a child going for a Christmas present. He'd grown up with dogs, served with dogs as an integral part of his unit in the Raiders, had had a beloved companion in Togo for nearly 15 years. While Syl and Naughty had helped deal with loneliness in one way, he missed having a pet. Going into space after losing Togo had been an utterly miserable experience. Very little to distract himself from that loss with once he'd gone into the black. 0G had sucked for everyone, and at least he'd had a little of Togo's ashes in a little keepsake to help deal with what was a minor tragedy to some, and equivalent to losing a parent for others. Today, however, it'd be all worth it. The risk, the homesickness, the near insanity of 6 months of 0G, getting in shootouts with alien scumbags for the full-on dumbest reasons he'd ever heard of. Hand in hand with Syl, he approaches the cloning tank that they'd selected for the first experiment. Even if it had failed, it'd still be Mikasa, as would the next, and the next, if that's what it took. And when it succeeded, he knew he'd hug that Mikasa all the tighter for the loss of her sisters. Far from a failure, however, floating quietly in the fluid was a single, perfect puppy. Syl steps to the tank's controls, reviewing the readouts carefully. Looks like everything is as it should be. We targeted the development period perfectly. We have one healthy American Alsatian puppy, aged about 3 months. Ready for solid food and all that. I still don't see how this isn't accelerated aging. The detailed explanation about how pushing aging forward interacted with cloned tissue and axiom had confused him to hell and back. The pretty vixen, deep in her work, finds time to roll her eyes. I told you, the cheat in the cloning process targets a point in a creature's development cycle. You can aim for pre-birth, which is best for extremely complex creatures, or very sensitive ones, or you can target slightly post-birth by a few of your Terran months tops. Anything further than that, and you risk the creature in question having developmental issues mentally and otherwise. If we had a surrogate available, I'd suggest producing pups as if they were just born, then having the surrogate nursemaid them for the few months or so till a puppy is independent. But since this is the first dog out of Cruel Space, right? That makes sense. I think it finally clicked this time. Post is likely to be popular with customers because it's close to an instant result, right? You want a puppy, you order a puppy, and a couple days later, bam, puppy. Exactly, darling. The puppy starts to drift downwards as the tank begins to drain, a warning light on the tank strobing to make sure someone's paying attention to it. Honestly, if they're stable, it'd be better for a lot of the livestock initially, too. Artificial impregnation of the livestock, and pets for that matter, with cloned fertilized eggs is probably healthier for the animals long term, but immediate term being able to immediately put feet or hooves on the ground and be fed and looked after with only food, water, and affection, as opposed to the incessant and detailed needs of a helpless infant, Syl continues to monitor the birth. Jerry leans in as the last of the water drains. An axiom field dries off the last of the fluid as the puppy slowly starts to stir. Pulse good. At least I think it's good. Hopefully these veterinary manuals you got are right breathing. Lungs are fully drained of the hyper-oxygenated fluid, and she just took her first breath. Brainwaves good. She's stirring. All right, let's open the tank up. Wouldn't want her to open her eyes and only see the tank when there's cuddles on hand. Syl snuggles in close, watching Jerry as much as the newly created life form before her. She was curious about the puppy, of course, but she was far more curious about her husband and his reaction. She knew this was incredibly important to him, that getting Togo's daughter meant all the world to him. Now she'd see the full spectrum of her husband's emotions. They'd been tightly contained previously, not in the way of one who bottles their emotions up, but in the way of someone who knows how to manage, control, and isolate them in the name of getting the job done. As the stirring puppy seemingly instinctively nuzzles into Jerry as he pulls her out of the tank and holds her in his arms, Syl can't help but feel a pang of longing deep in her stomach. Was this what Jerry would look like holding their firstborn? Sure, the face was different, and the fur, and the 4 legs. Lack of sapience. But with enough squinting, she could imagine it was a Vulpir kit. It made her heart flutter, and she embraced both spouse and tiny creature as the little being continued to stir. Finally, the little canine shakes off the great sleep that hard-marked its birth and development, and opens its eyes. A lupine yellow with a deep intelligence behind them, she looks to Jerry first, then Syl, and murmurs a happy sound before snuggling a bit more, clearly enjoying its parent's embrace. Jerry plants a kiss on the crown of the little creature's head, making her attentive ears wiggle a bit as she starts to look around and visually explore her new environment. Hello, Mikasa. Today's an extra special day now that you're here with us. What do Togo and Mikasa mean anyway, darling? Jerry looks up from where he's playing with the puppy, while a Yaoya customer watches on with a big smile on her many-clawed face. She'd heard about the pet shop services being offered from her little sister, a wife of one Herbert Jameson, and had come in to see if they could clone something a little more exotic. The nearly extinct predator species from the Yaoya homeworld was a near-legendary challenge to hunt, and if a small group could be cloned easily, placed into stasis and sent back to the Yaoya homeworld, she, Amali, could be confirmed as one of the first traditional hunter champions in centuries. Apparently, the traditional methods were all about hunting animals as a means of preparing one's self for the mating hunt, and proving one could successfully provide for mate, children, and clan. The tradition had drifted away from actually hunting animals for their meat, but Amali wanted to honor the old ways of her people. She, and many others, simply hadn't considered cloning for that purpose before. Jerry lightly tosses the ball he'd brought from the Dauntless for the growing Mikasa, sending her off at a sprint before looking up to find the women in the room were giving him their undivided attention. Is it a reference to the early history of these creatures, perhaps? You said they evolved from pack hunters' wolves, right? No. It's a reference to the military history of a country called Japan. Togo was a great admiral of their seagoing navy, and his flagship was the Mikasa. The Mikasa is still around even though Togo died a very long time ago, and I visited her while I was stationed in Japan for a time with my country's military. It was something Syl had said that caught Amali's interest, however, and she leans in to interrupt with a raised hand. Wait, I want to hear about all that too. But first humans bred pets from pack hunters? Really and truly? When my sister mentioned that, I thought her husband must have been teasing her. The big man rises, heading towards the desk with Mikasa trailing in his wake. Really and truly, wolves predated on humans at one point, and still do sometimes in extreme wilderness. Our other most popular pet is called a cat, and it's a small ambush predator. While we've bred them to suit our fancy, we can't really say we domesticated them like we did dogs. The leading theory is that cats more or less domesticated themselves. They took up residence near human settlements and preyed on rodents that tried to raid human food storage. Eventually, humans noticed that service was valuable and started feeding the cats when rodents were scarce and letting them inside during inclement weather. Amali's eyes sparkle. That's amazing. I might have to get a cat when I get back from the homeworld. If you're selling them to non-humans. Syl exchanges a look with her husband, who shrugs. I don't see why not. We have a file prepared with care instructions and how to synthesize food for them and the like. They have some specific dietary requirements. We also have a veterinary manual in galactic trade, but based on everything else out of cruel space so far, standard axiom healing techniques in the event of illness won't be a problem. How wonderful. I always wanted something a bit more exotic than a Paris. A little huntress in my apartment sounds like just the ticket. Jerry nods. Tell you what, miss, you end up buying these Nagala? He looks to Amali for a nod of confirmation before continuing. And we'll give you a cat on the house on your successful return from your homeworld. Considering we'll likely get regular contracts for the Nagala after that from other huntresses. It's the least we can do to celebrate your success with you. The Yaoya woman blinks and turns to Syl. Does he know what he just said in most hunting cultures? He's human. I think we can assume not, my dear. We don't know you, but I'm sure we could manage dinner sometime if you the only he in the room resists planting his face in his palm and groaning. What did I do? Amali blushes, unable to meet his eyes, her body fading from view slightly for a few seconds before becoming coherent again. You've set a challenge and offered a reward. By many traditions, especially if made to a woman from a man, that's more or less, how do you say, Syl takes pity on the other woman who's clearly overheating and gently takes over the explanation. You pretty much just proposed marriage or accepted a proposal and set conditions for what she needs to do to prove her suitability or worthiness as a wife. Now it's Jerry's turn to blush. What's the reddened skin mean? Amali asks, watching intently. It means he's embarrassed. The Vulpir giggles. Jerry opens his mouth to respond to what she just said when the door of the shop slides open. He turns to greet the new potential customers, and his greeting dies in his throat. 6 heavily armed aliens clomp into the building, weapons at the ready, 2 Horchka legbreakers, a rabbi sporting 4 different kinds of pistol in her hands. Then an armored Platin who'd augmented what her mama gave her and added a plasma cannon for good measure. The final thug was a desert Nagasha. The 6-armed snake woman had full body paint even on her arms, and was as heavily armed as the rest of her friends. You, Yaoya, beat it, or you're dead. Amali shares an almost mournful look with Syl and Jerry, and quickly vanishes from view, her loud footsteps clearly disappearing as the door opens and shuts again. Take it, you ladies want something from us. Jerry deadpans, desperately trying to get a proper read on the tactical situation as his hand inches towards his concealed pistol. All the cash you got in this shit show, we heard you've been trading with them, not Tretz, getting regular visits from all sorts of important types, and we know they're fucking loaded. So clearly, you've got some decent coin around. We just thought you could share some with us. We don't keep any money on us, save the bare minimum to conduct trade. Syl all but spits the words at the other women. The Nagasha snorts in disgust. Damn it. She could be lying, boss, one of the Horchka offers. The Nagasha considers the thought for what feels like hours before finally lifting her plasma pistol and aiming straight at Syl. Fair enough. Try to keep the man somewhat in one piece. We can share him around and either kill him, sell him, or keep him as a sex slave. At least we'll get something out of this runway that way. Unfortunately for the robbers and would-be slavers, Jerry chose that exact moment to strike. He reaches into an axiom pocket and hurls a pair of flash bang grenades in the general direction of the robbers and drops down behind the desk. The world above him erupts in plasma fire as he quickly finds his communicator and triggers the bright red emergency signal button everyone going out on Liberty had to have. Command post. What's the nature of the emergency? Armed robbery going very, very wrong. Jerry grunts into his communicator as he snags Mikasa by the scruff and drags the courageous puppy firmly behind the heavy metal cover of the reception desk where he was hunkered down with Syl. I think, anyway, they're not talking terribly much. 6 hostiles, maybe more outside. Be advised, might be a friendly Yaoya moving around stealthed. I'm going to see if I can teach them some manners, but I'm going to need backup and probably a lawyer ASAP. Armed response unit is en route, Commander. Just hold tight. Help's on the way. Also routing a call into Centris Police for local cops and probably a meat wagon. Why a meat wagon? Jerry grimaces as a plasma blast detonates above their heads, his EFL pattern shield ring catching any errant bits of flame that might have reached downwards. You know something I don't command? I know what type of guns you like, sir. Give 'em hell. Jerry snarls and tosses the communicator to Syl. Keep your head down, the puppy's safe, and channel Axiom into the ring I gave you if anything dangerous comes vaguely close to you. If the people on the end of that link ask you for information, respond as quickly and clearly as you can. Help's on the way. Massive pistol in hand, he flicks the safety off and begins to push Axiom into the magazine. He had a little totem placed under the grip, its entire purpose being to charge rounds with the appropriate additions with energy. A small bead of sintered silver-colored metal holding in appropriately arranged little pieces of Kutha had been added to the hollow in the anti-personnel rounds. They had next to no effect when used normally, but charged the rounds with Axiom, and they exploded with terrific effect under the appropriate conditions. Conditions such as being surrounded entirely by the natural Axiom field of a living being. The more advanced form of the round was even nastier, using the target's own Axiom against it, sucking in a theoretically breathtaking amount of energy in a very short amount of time before turning the chest cavity of the target into a new star for about a millisecond. But the results of those had been unstable at best. Jerry would just have to make do with more normal exploding ammunition. No time like the present for a field test. Jerry mutters to himself before starting to infuse his body with Axiom instead. Maybe if Amali did stick around, he'd get her to teach him the invisibility trick. It'd certainly be helpful right about now. He'd have to settle for speed. He flings himself out of cover and crosses the room to the left at speeds that would have done the heroes of old-school cartoons he'd grown up with proud. The visualization method pioneered by the EFL had turned out to be particularly valuable when your visualization was a martial artist manipulating massive amounts of intangible energy to beat the ever-loving hell out of everyone in their path. The big handgun comes up in under a second, and shooting entirely by instinct without the time really required to line up the shot before he needs to move again, the hand cannon roars. The 7.5 FK rounds impact the platen, the tank of the gang with the heaviest armor and the heaviest weapons, like a brick through a windshield. A flub of his trigger control pulls the first round down and to the left, and it slams home into the receiver of the plasma cannon, disabling the biggest threat on the field in terms of damage potential. The second, third, and fourth rounds go exactly where they were supposed to, all directly center of mass. They punch through the platen's armor like it was tissue paper, whether they hit on just the natural stuff or had to go through her additional armor first. When penetrating armor, velocitas erratico, speed, kills. The 7.5 FKS incredible velocity was designed to penetrate the best ceramic body armor at 100 meters. It wasn't a surprise that it made short work of armor not made to handle kinetics and natural armor plate at near bad breath distance. The explosive rounds quickly made one hell of a mess, bulging out the Platen S armor panels in weird places as her internal organs were shredded. Then the plasma explosion burned what was left. The armored alien had been dead before she even had time to register shock. Part of Jerry wanted to cheer, but the rest of her crew didn't stumble in the slightest in the face of such extreme force and response. The next bandit up is the more human of the multi-armed gunslingers in the room. The rabbi was just as fast as the files said they were, Axiom visibly flooding her limbs as she snaps off a series of plasma and laser shots at Jerry, which he gamely replies to with more of the powerful 7.5 rounds. Most people would be at a disadvantage when down to just a pistol, but the field pistol was not just any pistol. The ideal of the ancient offensive handgun program finally realized the monstrous beast was all the primary weapon a well-trained shooter needed, and Jerry was more than well-trained. A laser grazes his thigh enough to leave a burn through his armor, and he grunts in irritation at getting his flesh seared. The pain might have helped more than hindered, really. With more adrenaline pouring into his bloodstream, a near miss catches another plasma weapon right in the housing, and it erupts into a small vortex of flames. The severe burn leaves the rabbit woman open to a double tap that leaves her slumped onto the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. 6 up, 2 down, Jerry thinks to himself, as the scent of ozone from a near miss of a laser rifle fills his nose. He quickly relocates and scans the reception room. Syl is still hunkered down behind the desk. She'd empowered the shield ring, then shaped it into a dome to keep herself and Mikasa safe. Luckily, he had the bad guy's complete attention. He was the active threat, and the active payday after all. He raises his pistol again, about to drop a round into the rear most of the Horchka, when a sudden distortion glimmers behind her. A violent blur of motion leaves a suddenly very visible knife blade in the alien's throat, as the unseen warrior gags the Horchka-S mouth, yanks her head back, and opens the alien thug up like she was filleting a fish. Jerry smiles to himself. He'd suspected Amali hadn't left, and he was very happy to be right. Cutting and running didn't seem like a normal pattern of behavior from what he understood of the Yaoya, but taking an opportunity to set up an ambush? That checked out perfectly. The distortion that is Amali begins to climb up the walls in a way that would make her Zayden kindred proud. It looked like she was going for one of the Nagasha. She probably needed a distraction. Grunting to himself, Jerry slides into a good position and activates his shield ring before exploding out of cover and racing at the nearest alien, the last of the two Horchka. The tusked woman bellows in response, countercharging Jerry with her head lowered only to find him planting an Axiom-infused hand on her forehead, using it as a springboard to get airborne. He puts a little extra Axiom into his momentum to help his rotation, so he is directly above the Horchka. 6 rounds of 7.5 FK hammer home into the Horchka's back from above, scattering the contents of her chest cavity a few feet in front of her across the floor. Another push of Axiom and he's on his feet, reloading as he reassesses just in time to see the remaining Nagasha swat at something invisible that had just opened a decent-sized gash on her side. Amali was in trouble. He couldn't tell for sure, but it had sounded like she'd actually taken that hit. If she was even slightly stunned, the next few seconds could prove fatal. He had to protect Amali, had to protect Sil, had to protect Nadi and their unborn child, had to protect Mikasa. His well-trained mind flutters through tactical options as the Nagasha reels. There was only one thing to do. He charges forward again, putting every drop of Axiom he could grab into his mobility, leaping into the air and grabbing onto the collar of the Nagasha's body armor. Before she can respond, his pistol is tucked under her chin and speaks a final time, splattering the serpentine alien's brains across the ceiling like Jackson Pollock's version of the Sistine Chapel during his red phase. Suddenly exhausted, Jerry kicks back off the serpent's corpse before it collapses and comes to a rest near the door, pistol still covering the entryway as he tries to draw an Axiom to recover. Sil? He gasps out, working hard on remembering to breathe with his heart pounding in his ears. Emily, you girls okay? Sil rises from behind the reception desk, her eyes wide at the sheer scale of the destruction her husband had wreaked upon those who would threaten her. Her face goes through a variety of emotions. Shock. Horror. Her eyes dart around the room before finally coming to rest on Jerry. The sheer brutality of the violence was a lot for a woman who'd never truly been in danger before. She'd told him about her life after all, and he could read it across her face like it was a billboard. No trouble more significant than a giggling escape from a police officer after stealing a bottle of alcohol with her sisters and friends. A far cry from being caught in the middle of a strong arm robbery where her new husband proceeds to hand out the kind of violence you normally needed an APUC on hand for. She was incredibly lucky and sheltered, and now she was getting a very visceral tour of just how desolate the harsher side of reality could be. Sil unconsciously pulls Mikasa a bit closer to her gargantuan bosom as her emotional state finally settles on what Jerry knows to be a look of intense arousal, even by Volper standards. Shock at what he could do, at what and who she'd married, and a deep-seated understanding that her husband would fight a one-man war against all comers to protect her and their family. All that translated into some part of her foxy mind as a deep, eager, passionate thirst. If it wasn't for all the blood, Amali possibly being hurt, and the imminent arrival of reinforcements, Jerry was certain she'd pounce him onto his back and ride him ragged right the hell now. Finally, something clicks in the Volpir's mind, and Sil remembers she actually needs to respond. She delicately clears her throat and helps Mikasa wave her paw like she was an infant waving to her father with her mother's help. We're here, darling. What about Amali? Amali decloaks and starts pulling herself free of the leader Nagasha-esque coils. I was hoping you'd take a bit longer so I could get out of these coils without you seeing me. But if you're worried about me, the huntress grunts with exertion, finally slipping out of the Nagasha's coils. Damn bitch managed to get a lucky hit in, just flailing around. Didn't actually know where I was for a proper blow. They were all lucky I just had a damn pocket knife. Seems I'm going to start carrying something a bit more substantial like my hunting gauntlets. The alien huntress takes a moment to spit on the Nagasha-esque charred remains. Pathetic bandit trash. She saunters over, clearly far more comfortable with battle and at after effects than Sil is. Jerry crosses to his wife and pulls her into his arms, the puppy happily nuzzling into Jerry's chest, where it trapped between them. The Volpire woman grabs him by the collar and violently yanks him down for a hard, hungry kiss. Seems Miss Sil is fine too. Imali opines from her position nearby with a wry smile. I was so scared. You are okay? Both of you? All of us? Jerry notices Sil unconsciously adding Imali to the US, involved, and in a far more personal way than just looking after one customer. She had risked her life for them after all, and that sure as hell counted for a lot for Jerry, and it seemed to count for a lot for Sil too. Right, ladies, let get back into the main facility and lock this place down. Natty must be freaking out from all the noise. But first, Imali. The huntress looks to Jerry with a nod of acknowledgement. You got hurt protecting this family. You didn't have to. You could have walked away. I think that earns you a seat at the table. He quickly glances over at Syl, his intent clear to his first wife who nods her approval. I think you just earned that proposal for real. Maybe come over now and then before you leave. We can have dinner, talk. Then once you complete your hunt, bring the beast's hide back as proof that you have completed your task. Imali nods slowly, considering all of that before offering them both a shy smile. You have my word, Jeremiah of Earth. I will earn the title of Hunt's Mistress the old way. Then I shall return here and make an offering to your wives and to you that I might join their number. Any further conversation is cut off by the sounds of shooting and sirens outside. Jerry quickly herds the girls back behind cover. Big bad guys had pulled some shit where they pretended to be local cops before. No reason they couldn't again. Instead of alien shock troops or gangsters, however, a human infantryman calls into the building, thunder, to which Jerry responds, flash, leading to a squad of friendlies from Jerry's company piling into the room, which finally let the big man relax, slumping into Syl and Imali's comforting support. Took you bastards long enough someone get a goddamn mop.